Welcome to the Vertical MRO Podcast, where we dive into the world of helicopter maintenance, repair, and overhaul. In each episode, we talk with the technicians, engineers, and experts who keep helicopters flying. Because at the end of the day, no maintenance, no mission.
Basically told the recruiter, because I had kind of this little bit of background knowledge of growing up around the military. I said, look, I just want to be in aviation. And basically it was, here, pick your job. Luckily, and remember, it is all about what you're qualified to do. I don't think there was a single aviation job that I didn't qualify. I didn't know anything about it. I went down the list. I can remember it was like a Apache armament specialist. And I'm like, nope, that sounds complicated. And then it's like, this like an avionics technician. I was like, nope, helicopter's got lots of wires. I don't want to go near there. And this is, the true story was I saw a UH-60 Blackhawk repair technician. And I was just like, I looked at the counselor. I said, what do they do? And this is verbatim quote. He said, they're Jiffy Lube for helicopters. I said, really? He goes, yeah. He said, they pull the helicopters in, they do whatever servicing needs to be done with them, and then they roll them back out to the flight line and they fly. So that's what those guys do. They're Jiffy Lube for helicopters. That's cool. That's what I want. It's like, that's what I want to do. And it wasn't until I got to Virginia and there were people in other classes and they were like, man, I can't wait to get our wings. And I was like, who gets wings? They're like, we get wings. I said, you get wings? They said, no, we all get wings. I was like, what do you mean we get wings? I had no idea. And I was just like, that's cool. It's like bonus. Like, sweet. Yeah. I didn't even know that.
Yeah. Hey, welcome to the Vertical MRO Podcast, brought to you by Vertical HeliCASTS and in partnership with Vertical Magazine. In this episode of the Vertical MRO Podcast, Leslie Ferry and I sit down with James Simmons. He's the founder of Avalatus and a seasoned aviation professional. During the discussion, we explore his career journey in aviation and gather his insights into the rotorcraft maintenance industry. James shares his experiences from his military service to his current role in workforce development with VAI, highlighting the challenges and opportunities within the MRO sector. Learn about his contributions to the Vertical MRO Conference and his passion for fostering new talent in aviation. This conversation is a must-listen for anybody interested in the future of aviation maintenance and the pivotal role of leadership and training. Thank you to this episode's sponsors, Rotorcraft Repair and Manufacturing, Precision Aviation Group, and Airbus. Hey, welcome to the Vertical MRO Podcast. I'm today's host, John Gray. I have a really cool conversation in store for today, one that Leslie and I have been talking about for quite a while as we've been working through the Vertical MRO Conference and talking about some of the presenters that are going to be there and some of the ideas that surround the MRO Conference. To have that conversation, Leslie Ferry, how you doing?
Doing great, John. Thanks for having me on with you today.
Yeah, excited to talk to you, and thanks for introducing me to James Simmons, today's guest on the podcast.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Leslie. I appreciate being here.
Yeah. Before we get into today's conversation about James and the cool stuff that he's doing, can you just give us, Leslie, an update on the MRO conference and where we sit with that?
Yeah, it's getting exciting and a little scary. The Vertical MRO Conference in Kelowna, British Columbia is 3 months away. Those dates are October 7th through the 9th. And then we've got the conference coming up in Irving, Texas, which is the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex area. And those dates are November 10th through the 12th. Registration for both conferences is currently open, and we still have some slots to fill. So excited for all of those maintenance and overhaul folks out there listening to go to our website at verticalmro.com to check out all the details and to get registered.
We've talked about the conference quite a bit, so people probably aren't foreign to the idea of what this conference is, but I just want to touch on it for a minute because I know, James, you've seen it throughout the course of your career. In aviation, we go to conferences all the time. Verticon, HAI, a lot of conferences exist, but there's really never an emphasis and a focus on maintainers, especially in rotorcraft aviation, right? So we felt it was really important to shine a light on the maintenance profession and to, improve our community through education, networking, and training. So those three things I think are critical to any aspect of your career, regardless of what segment of aviation you're in. But, it is critical to that. Leslie's built a really cool educational track for both Kelowna and for Irving. Can you kind of talk through a little bit or give people an idea of what kind of training they can expect at the different locations?
Yeah. At both locations, of course, we'll have the aircraft OEMs there doing technical updates. We'll have the engine OEMs there doing technical updates as well. We've got various topics relating to maintenance, anything from corrosion to hums to cargo hooks and hoists and proper maintenance and care. And then we really realized that there was a need out there for topics dealing with leadership.
Yeah.
And so we've got several sessions that will be dedicated to the whole topic of leadership and getting some of those folks that are maybe in a non-supervisory role, giving them some insight for them to be able to take that next step to become maybe the director of maintenance or the director of purchasing or whatever, just to give them those needed people skills that are really necessary to be effective leaders. And so we're really excited. And then at the Irving conference, we've got James who's going to be there. We are going to keep him busy on 2 of the 3 days. And he's going to be covering topics dealing with human factors and root cause. And I'll let him kind of give a little teaser for some of those topics. We don't want to give too much away, but we've really spent a lot of time and effort and put together an agenda that folks from all different walks of the MRO area are going to be able to come and learn something and walk away and hopefully be able to put that knowledge into use. In addition to the education sessions that we're offering, we're going to be doing different panel discussion on MRO suppliers and the issues that they're encountering right now. We're going to have a panel discussion in Kelowna on cross-border shipping, which is a hot topic. We'll also have panel discussions in both locations on emerging technology and helicopter maintenance. And then the one that I'm really excited for is called Rotor Rookies versus Veteran Mechanics, the Maintenance Showdown. Dun, dun, dun. So we're looking forward to having some veterans in the industry and then some folks that are newer in their career within helicopter maintenance, and just talking about the differences and how we can learn from each other.
Yeah.
And so I'm really excited about that part. And then, of course, the networking. There's so many different networking opportunities, whether it be at lunch or at the welcome reception or walking around the exhibit hall. Just a good chance to mix and mingle. And I always think of these types of events kind of like a family reunion.
Yeah.
You get to run into a lot of folks that you've maybe worked with in the past or went to AME school with, that sort of thing. And so just an opportunity to really mix, mingle, and hopefully find yourself a mentor.
Yeah. All those issues are huge. Leadership and mentorship almost go hand in hand. So it's cool that you bring those two things up. But leadership's important. We talk about the need for good leadership, but I think we're guilty as a community of not developing leadership, as far as training goes.
Right.
Like you should just through osmosis figure out how to be a leader. Well, that's kind of hard.
Right.
So we've got a good cadre that's been built to do some leadership development stuff, which Leslie, you've done a phenomenal job building this thing up. So really excited for the conference. James, excited to see you in Irving.
Yeah.
It's going to be just a really cool opportunity to bring the community together, like you said. I know, James, you've been a part of a lot of different networks and conferences. In fact, I see you're teaching an IA renewal course at Verticon. Mm-hmm. Which is really cool. Verticon's a great conference. I love what it does for the industry. You're part of the workforce development program through Verticon.
I am.
And we'll get into that a little bit. I think that's one of the headwinds that our community is facing as a whole is the recruitment side. So how do we develop that? So I'm interested to hear some input from you through your experience in the workforce development committee on maybe some new ways that we can look at recruitment. But before we get into that, let's jump to you and kind of your background and how you got into aviation.
Ooh, that's a good one. That's going back a little bit of ways. So I've been in the industry now almost going on 30 years. So it's been quite an adventure. I started out, and I've always been passionate. I've always been passionate about helicopters since I was a kid. So I grew up an Army brat. And I remember my stepdad, he was a military police officer. And I used to actually go out to the airfield and sit and watch all the aircraft flying and doing everything. It's like, man, you know what? I just want to be around them. I just want to hang out around helicopters. I don't care what I do. Just, I didn't have a goal of anything that I wanted to do. I just wanted to be around them. I just wanted it's almost like nowadays where if you don't sit there and look at a helicopter through the eyes of a 5-year-old, you're missing out because, we get so inundated with the adult side of the house that we don't sit back and just go, you know what, they're still really cool.
That's cool.
Yeah. So it's like you have to do that. Graduated high school, I joined the Army and basically, told the recruiter because I had kind of this little bit of background knowledge of growing up around the military. I said, look, I just want to be in aviation. Or, if I can't some reason get in the aviation, I want to be an MP. And so we worked it out and basically it was here, pick your job. And I mean, and luckily, and remember, that it is all about what you're qualified to do. So
right.
I don't think there was a single aviation job that I didn't qualify for because I remember just the list was long and I didn't know anything about MOS codes. I didn't know what anybody did. I didn't know anything about it. And as I went down the list, I can remember it was like a Apache armament specialist. And I'm like, nope, that sounds complicated, and then this like an avionics technician. I was like, nope, helicopters got lots of wires. I don't want to go near there, And this is, the true story was I saw a UH-60 Blackhawk repair technician. And I was just like, I looked at the counselor. I said, what do they do? And this is verbatim quote. He said, they're Jiffy Lube for helicopters. I said, really? He goes, yeah. He said, they pull the helicopters in, they do whatever servicing needs to be done with them. He said, then they roll them back out to the flight line and they fly. So that's what those guys do. They're Jiffy Lube for helicopters. I said, that's cool. That's what I want. That's cool. That's what I want to do. Everything beyond that, what was really, new to me was I did not know what really that job entailed. I remember, you go to basic training, then you go to advanced individual training. And so in basic, everybody's learning the same stuff. And they would ask me, what MOS are you? I was like, I'm a UH-60 Blackhawk repair mechanic. That's all I knew. It's like, I couldn't tell you what job code I was. I had no idea. And it wasn't until I got to Virginia and there were people in other classes and they were like, man, I can't wait to get our wings. And I was like, who gets wings? They're like, we get wings. I said, you get wings? They said, no, we all get wings. I was like, what do you mean we get wings? I had no idea. And I was just like, that's cool. It's a bonus. Like, sweet. Yeah. I didn't even know that. Yeah. I remember one person was like, man, I can't wait to be a crew chief. I said, well, who gets to be a crew chief? They said, that's what our job is. And so I had no clue that we even flew in the back of the aircraft. And
you just wanted to be Mr. Jiffy Lube.
I just wanted to be around helicopters. I was going to be happy. So everything else was kind of like bonus to me, So then it was like, well, all right, now, and this is the first time I ever set into like a career path. Like, okay, now I've got certain goals I need to achieve. So I ended up, I did 7 years in the Army. I had an opportunity when I first joined, when I first got assigned to Fort Campbell, to be in the medevac. And so I went over, actually you had to do an interview. You weren't just allowed to walk into the medevac, because the mission was so unique. They would do this. So I remember it was a panel interview with the first sergeant and platoon sergeants and different maintenance people and everything else. It's like, if you want to be part of us, you got to pass the test. And it was a board interview of just asking questions about the aircraft, about systems, about maintenance, about different stuff. And they had to basically accept you and say, all right, well, you become be part of our unit. And so it was, again, you're just fortunate to be able to be part of that. And then you realize the mission and how unique it is and how important it is. And then you identify what's maintenance's role for that mission. And then you understand the responsibility you give it. Now, the bonus factor is you're sitting in the back. You have zero patient responsibilities, but the aircraft is your responsibility. You've done all the maintenance on the aircraft. So when the medic's back there and you're taking a patient to the hospital and the pilot's pulling the guts out of it, trying to get there faster, that's not the time where you're like, man, I hope I torqued that ball good. hope I put that cap back on right, or I hope I put that chip detector back in. You realize that's the importance of what you're doing, because you're pushing the aircraft to the extreme of what it's engineered to do. But at the same time, you've got a life that's hanging in the balance as well, and you're a huge part of that. And I love the mission so much. I actually, every time I went 4 duty stations, Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and then I went to Korea, and then I went to Fort Riley, Kansas, and then ultimately Hawaii. But every unit I went to, I managed to get into the medevac unit. And I love the mission so much. So I ended up 7 years, 4 medevac units for my entire time.
James, what aircraft were you doing maintenance on for the medevac teams?
So I was doing maintenance on UH-60 Blackhawks. So
okay, they were all Blackhawks.
All Blackhawks. So we were alpha models. These were the old ones. You know, we didn't even the one thing about medevac, you got the hand-me-downs from everybody in the Army. So it was the oldest fleet, the most hours on them. They were rough. You know, they were kind of, like I said, it's just a hand-me-down process of where the aircraft end up. And of course, you know, as a crew chief or as a maintainer, you're just like, cool, give me the one that needs the most attention. Give me the one that needs the most work, because I want to sit, you know, once you, and the feeling you get, and as a maintainer, the feeling you get when you put your name on the side of that aircraft, and it's now a representation of you.
Yeah.
And that's the big importance. You know, the military instills that into the crew chiefs to make sure that, you know, yes, it is your aircraft. It is a direct reflection of you, and it is how you represent yourself, but you represent it through an aircraft. And I remember Air Methods, you know, Chris Meinhardt, director of maintenance with Air Methods, he said at one time, which is it's equivalent to the civil world, which is 90% of your maintenance is appearance. And it's because, you know, when you look at when I worked EMS in the civilian world, you know, you've got a aircraft sitting on the roof, and administrators or people walk by and they see that aircraft. They don't know what's under the cowlings. They don't look at it. They don't care. You could have the cleanest. It could not leak a single drop of hydraulic fluid or oil or anything like that. What they look at is the outside of the aircraft, and that's the direct reflection of the maintenance.
Yep.
How well it shines, how clean is your plexiglass, you know, all that different aspect. And so, you know, it's a different takeaway. So out of the military, I got out and was like, all right, now what do I do? So I actually started Embry-Riddle when I was in the Army, and continued. I got my A&P once I got out. I actually started with U.S. Airways Express, PSA Airlines in Dayton. Like I said, my wife was Air Force, so she was stationed at Wright-Patt, and stayed with them until they filed bankruptcy. And I remember that, like the day it happened, walked into the hangar. I'm sitting there putting erosion tape on an aircraft, and supervisor walks up. He goes, "Hey man, you got a minute?" I said, "Yeah." So we go in the office. They said, "We're gonna have to let you go." I said, okay. You know, my wife was on third shift at the hospital. So I went there, and she looks at me and she goes, "What happened?" I was like, "I don't know." I said, like 20 minutes ago, I had a job. Now I don't, you know, and you get, and you know, immediately thrown into what the economic impact in the aviation and how it affects it, because it is detrimental all over the place. You know, I mean, like we remember COVID and the impact it had with the airlines and everything. And I mean, it's just, it's something that you just have to have an understanding if you're going to be in the industry. It's going to have economic impact. There's going to be ups and downs.
Yes.
Each organization has to figure out how to let themselves, you know, be most efficient at what they do. And so that's part of the inspiration. So from there, I actually went over to Iraq. I picked up I went home, I applied for a contracting company. They called me the next morning. They said, "Iraq or Afghanistan, which one you want?" I said, "Oh, I'll take Iraq." You know, and they said, okay. So I spent almost 4 years in Iraq.
Wow.
As a contractor working on Blackhawks for the Army. So it was, you know, that was fun and exciting. We supported the mission, and it was a completely different array. I mean, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you just kept the fleet flying. The units would rotate in and out, the soldiers would rotate in and out, and the contractors stayed there, and you just kept working the birds and completing the mission, because it was constantly evolving. You know, so you were there as a stable point where you got to see 1 minute everybody's celebrating liberation with the U.S., and the next minute IEDs are a huge thing, and then insurgency is a big, and you just see this whole evolution as it goes on. But you see the role the aircraft play, and how important, and the commanders trying to make decisions of how to utilize those assets. So after a while, I was like, all right, I'm tired. I need to go back to a real life. You know? So I went back out and got picked up originally CJ Systems back in the day in Dayton, Ohio with Miami Valley Hospital and Care Flight. as a maintenance manager. And then ultimately Air Methods bought out CJ Systems, and then we changed hats and changed, registration and everything, and did certificate changeover and hung out there for a while, and all the way up until, again, the economics.
Yeah.
2008, 2009. And it's like, oh, this, I remember, but from there I went down south and jumped on a military contract again. So 50% of my career, I've been DoD contracting and then civilian. So that gives, almost like a technical advantage. I had to fall back. So I figured that out.
Yeah.
When the economy goes bad in the civil world, then I can just go over to the military for a little bit.
Well, let me ask you, because you spent, and I guess this goes back to your getting out of the military and you go to the airlines. And one thing I love about aviation, or helicopter aviation, you probably agree, is the mission mindset. Mm-hmm. Everything that you do typically is to advance a mission. And not that the airlines don't have a mission, they do, but it's different, right? The sense of importance is really different.
It's completely different.
How did that affect you as a maintainer going from the Army to the civilian world working for the airlines?
Thank you to our sponsor, Precision Aviation Group. Mission-critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed-wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory globally, 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
So the airlines are unique. One was, it's teamwork, but individualistic approach, very much so. It's you are brought in to do whatever job they need you to do or whatever you're qualified to do, at whatever training level that you're up to. But I was part of maintenance teams where you work on an aircraft, you don't even talk to the people next to you. They're just walking, one rolls in, it needs an A check done on it, and people just go to yet a sequence of how you monitored the checklist of what needed to be done next and who was working what, and you just kind of tagged in on the checklist and then went and did whatever maintenance tasks need to be done. But you could have 4 or 5 people, and it was just, the birds have to make gate time. That's priority. They have to be done, completed, pushed to the gate. I remember the one quote that just blew me away was, "We can fly the aircraft broke, but we can't fly them needing inspection. So you need to get your priorities straight." And I was like, hold on.
Yeah, wait a minute.
And it took me a long time to actually figure out, kind of interpret what that meant, which was the fact that we can MEL or we can defer discrepancies, but you can't fly it, do an inspection. And so it was don't focus on fixing everything, focus on getting the inspections done, and then we will organize and manage fixing everything. It was just a different set of priorities. Mm-hmm. As a crew chief, it's you find a discrepancy, you fix it. Find a discrepancy, fix it. That's the way that, order the parts, do what you need to do or whatever. But getting to the airlines, and it was like, what are you doing changing light bulbs?
Yeah.
It's like, we have to finish the inspection. We don't care about the light bulbs. We'll get to the light bulbs when we have time to get to the light bulb, and so it was unique and different. And I was young, so it was understanding the roles and responsibilities of everybody, understanding what the inspectors did, what their role and responsibility was, what airworthiness truly meant from the civil standpoint, and what it means when that aircraft is, and who your customers were. Traditionally, that was honestly the recognizing that maintainers, for the most part, or at the airlines and different operations, a lot of people go, well, the customers, the passengers. But for maintainers, the reality is your first line customer is the pilots. Your second line customer are the passengers. The pilot's the one that has to accept the aircraft. He's the one that has to be comfortable operating the aircraft. He's the one that has to be comfortable with the maintenance that you're performing. And he or she has to ultimately is your first line customer. And I think that's a hard truth a little bit for mechanics to understand, because you just have different dynamics of mechanics and pilot relationships, but it's to go, you're right, you're the customer, I'm the service provider. I need to provide the best service that I can for you. And that kind of subsides it a little bit. But the airlines are unique and they're different. And fixed wing guys walking in as a helicopter guy, first thing I did, I got labeled a rotorhead. They're like, oh, you're
I wear that as a badge of honor. Thank you.
Yeah. Sure.
Well, it's interesting. You know, obviously a lot of people are getting drawn from the rotorcraft community into the airlines because of the incentives that exist there, the financial incentives. But you talk about, you know, the things that you're asked to do there. And I feel like in a lot of ways, and I'm not throwing shade at the people that work there, but I feel like in a lot of ways you're a widget manager. Here's your widget. This is what you're responsible for. And don't look outside of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in our community, a lot of times you're in charge of the whole aircraft, like you said. And that's, I think, a lot more fulfilling to be a part of the mission in its entirety, not just the widget manager for that mission that takes place.
Because when James was talking about his role in the Army as crew chief, you know, I could feel that sense of pride that you were taking care of your aircraft and overseeing everything. And I can see where it would have been difficult going into the airline job where you're a widget manager. You're not in charge of everything. You don't have that sense of pride and ownership, I guess.
It is.
You've got to find a way to get that sense of pride. Yeah.
You do. You have to create your own sense of purpose. Passion is going to carry you a long ways. So don't get me wrong. And this is one of the firm things that I believe anybody that is in the aviation industry, whether fixed wing or rotary wing, it's for passion.
Yeah.
There's certain factors that we cannot deny, which is the fact, you know, the when you talk about the pay and the incentives and everything else, well, across the board, industry wise, it's always a lower level of income per se. CEOs of airlines make less than CEOs of other industries. And they know that, you know, they're fully aware of that. And it's why, because the passion is really what's driving the people. That's where we understand you get to be part of something unique, even from the technician standpoint. And when you look at mechanics, and, you know, if you say, okay, we look at pay of a car mechanic versus, you know, SAE certified car mechanic versus an aircraft mechanic. And an aircraft mechanic not only has the responsibility and the liability, but they also have the legal aspect they have to think about. You know, they got federal regulations that are holding them required to perform their jobs. You know, there's an instinctive point where you're like, it's not fair. No, it's not fair, but that's what you signed up to do. Yeah. You know, it's the same thing like mechanics when they realize, you know, and I'll celebrate with them when they realize that they fix broke stuff for a living. That's one of the greatest moments they have in their life, because instead of complaining about their work, they actually begin to accept it and go, you're right. It's what I do. It's what you do. You know, pilot's going to call you when the aircraft's broke. The pilot's going to let you know when it's not running right. They're going to let you know. It's like, that's what they're trained to do. You know, so you can't sit there and be like, oh, you woke me up in the middle of the night and complaining about this. Well, that's what you do, you know. So once you accept that, everybody's happy. And then, you know, now you know what you signed up to do. And it is, to me, it's fun. It should be fun. It should be exciting. Yeah. And I know it's really difficult to bring that out at times, because there's a lot of it. When we talk about external pressures, yes, you have cost of operations. Yes, you have out of service time. Yes, you have all of these different factors that always come into play, and especially with helicopters. Right. I'm going to start out. It's like the old saying, you know, how do you make $2 million in the helicopter industry? You know, start with 4. Yeah. 50% of your cost of operations is going to go to maintenance, you know? And so it's like, you have that understanding from the beginning that I call those responsible aircraft owners. They understand that, you know, even as an IA, I've sat with customers negotiating, working on price points of doing annuals or different stuff with their aircraft. And the easy one is to say, you know what, I don't think I'm the right technician for you. A responsible owner, to me, they understand what their cost of operations are. They completely, that's the responsible way to own an aircraft.
Yep.
I understand you want to get the best deal you can, but at the same time, there is a standard. There's an industry standard that exists, whether it be labor or whether it be cost of fuel or whether it be cost of parts or insurance. And you work within those confines that, yep, this is what it costs to own and operate an aircraft, whether it be helicopter or airplane. Those are the responsible. And I think the business owners are the same aspect. They understand what they're getting into, and they understand what it takes to keep them in the air and to keep them flying. And a lot of operators do a superb job at it. Rotary wing is complicated. It is very complicated.
Right.
There's a lot more dynamic factors to me than you know, single engine world is one of its own. Twin engine world is another one of its own. And how do you even begin to separate those two?
Right.
To make sure that you're hiring the right people and putting them in the right spots and making sure. I've had base mechanics in EMS. They do a phenomenal job because you're asking them to do more than just take care of the aircraft. They're receiving parts, they're shipping parts, they're having to sit there and deal with the forms and records. They're having to, they wear all these different hats, but yet they're a base mechanic. It's interesting when you sit there and say that. But yes, the isolation within the airlines to go, here, I just want you to do this one focal point and focus on this, and that's it.
Yeah, that would be challenging for me. The fulfillment you get from the mission as a whole is where I think it's exciting. Your experience as a crew chief, not only do you get to work in the aircraft, but you also get to participate in the mission in a way that a lot of people don't get to do. Can you talk about how that ultimately impacted your vision of the industry and your passion for it as you went forward?
I think it begins to set people apart. So I've met people that had no desire to fly, and that was one of the things. Now, and this is kind of like, to me, it's like the evolution. When I started out, and before I got in the medevac, I was in an intermediate maintenance level unit, so we were doing phases and all the major maintenance and things like that. But one of the requirements was when we finished the phase on an aircraft, the whole entire team had to go fly them. And it was like, that was the proof of the, in the pudding that, hey, you maintained it here. You need to get on it before you're going to put anybody else on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those, to me, and I grant it, not everybody has a desire to fly or they want to be part of it. It just kind of always set me back where somebody's like, I'm not going to go fly. I'm like, what? You work on it and not want to fly it. But, it kind of like, because it was ingrained in us, this is the way it is. This is the standard.
Right.
This is the industry standard of how it begins. I always enjoyed the fact that you're taking care of your aircraft. You're learning all of the ins and outs of the systems and how they work. And you realize I get sit with my aircraft and the way that it runs, it operates, or whatever little personality traits it has. And then as you cycle pilots through the cockpit, the ability to brief them and go, hey, here's where she's at. This is what it's got going on, or hey, number one engine, strong engine. Number two is the weak engine, or figuring out so that they're not getting these kind of like erroneous maintenance, right? Hey, I don't think this thing's running right or whatever. But it was the understanding that you're kind of that stable part with the aircraft. So you can watch the evolution of the airframe. Of course, it goes in the phase, everything gets ripped apart, gets put back together, and your aircraft was perfect. And now you get to start all over again. So I think that's the maintenance circle.
Yeah.
So
when you look at your time, one in the Army, but two as a contractor overseas, are there any missions that you can look back on that you were a part of, as you're a part of the crew, that was really impactful? And what I'll do is provide an example from one of the podcasts that we did in the Hangar Z. We did a podcast with Alan Mack. He's a CW5 Army pilot, flew special operations missions. He was a part of some really cool things. One of the incidents he talked about was going into a hilltop LZ and taking some machine gun fire. The rounds penetrated the hydraulic system, started losing hydraulic fluid, and he was losing his ability to control the aircraft. Luckily, his crew chief on board was able to open some hydraulic fluid canisters they had on board and manually pump hydraulic fluid into the system, which allowed him to kind of crash land into the mountain. And had it not been for that crew chief and his ability to do that, that aircraft would have been lost. And Alan Mack wouldn't have been here to have this conversation. I don't expect a dramatic story like that from you, because that's a pretty dramatic story. But the things that you did and saw over the course of your career must have been pretty impactful. Is there one thing that kind of stands out from that?
Thanks to our sponsor, Airbus. Airbus provides the most efficient helicopter solutions to its customers who serve, protect, save lives, and safely carry passengers in demanding environments. Its civil and military helicopters are flying all over the world, making missions possible. Visit airbus.com for more information.
For the time in Iraq as a contractor, so I didn't crew any aircraft. We performed all the maintenance when the aircraft returned. Now on that onset, and we had the difference. We launched a fleet. We send the guys out to go do whatever mission is required of them. And what we had was, for an aircraft to return to its parking spot was a good sign. When an aircraft taxis all the way up to the hangar and flashes the landing light at the team, that was kind of like the universal sign of, something's wrong. And there were some things that we walked out on, and it was just, I remember one time they had landed and they put the nose into a berm and they put the tail into a berm. So it kind of wrecked the whole aircraft, bumped the stabilizer up 90 degrees in the back and blew out the front chin bubble and different stuff. And it was just like, we're looking at the crew, and of course, they're like Wild West Cowboys, man. They just shut down. And they're just like, yep, fix her, we'll walk away. And so we're like, and I remember one of the Army reps, they got civilians that represent Aviation Missile Command as well. And he's walking around and he goes, you guys gonna be able to fix this? And I remember I opened the cockpit door and I threw it shut, and it just bounced off of the airframe. I was like, I said, what's that tell you?
No detective, but something's wrong here.
Well, and unfortunately, that was the thing. You can have fun and you can go fight a war, but at the same time, you're going to sit there and cost some of the things. I remember the probably one of the crazy ones was they had an aircraft that they said, hey, we need you to come over here and assess this damage, and it had a bullet hole through the side of the airframe in the cabin. And I remember looking at it and I'm like, why does this look like it went from the inside out? And they're like, don't question it. Just fix it.
Don't ask me questions.
Yeah.
So the soldier had his scope was clear, but he had his barrel resting on the airframe. And so where it hit the aircraft was like the Achilles tendon. It was one of the most critical airframe junctures. And it was just like, so you find it hard to believe. And I remember the maintenance officer, he made the quote of the year when I walked into his office and was there telling him the bad news. And he's like, the Blackhawk's better suited to fly Grand Canyon tours than it is to fly in combat. And it was like, I was like, that's a pretty good one, because it could not believe that, one bullet. He's like, there's no way one bullet can take this whole entire aircraft out of service. And I'm like, I said, every aircraft has an Achilles tendon.
Yeah.
All you got to do is find it.
Right.
I was like, there is no aircraft that, it's kind of like the reverse of the engineering standpoint. The engineers will sit there and tell you, I can make an aircraft that'll never crack. It'll also never fly. So
That's funny.
Yeah. They're like, we can engineer you anything. It won't get off the ground, but it'll never crack. So it's always thought that was one of the unique things. But there were a handful of times like that where aircraft would come back and they'd have just different. I remember interviewing with PHI actually when I worked in the Gulf of Mexico. They asked me that similar question. They said, what's one of the things a mechanic that you thought was most influential on you? And I was like, taking a 4-foot, 1/4-inch dowel rod and following bullet holes through an airframe to figure out where they went and what they hit. And it was like, that's, because you realize, one, how soft the aluminum is, and exactly you anticipate, because it's kind of like where the movies let you wrong. You anticipate these big, huge holes. And then you realize when they come back and they're just real teeny tiny, and you're just like, that's it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. But where did it go and what it hit and what did it do? Where did it stop?
Right.
Where is it now? And so battle damage assessments was really, it was different. It was just different. It was actually, you had to put on your thinking hat, and it's because it's not all in the book at that point.
Yeah.
It's
interesting. Rounds seem to have a mind of their own and how they travel and where they deflect from. We'd see a lot in law enforcement as they hit vehicles. Same idea. In fact, the first shooting that I was a part of, I was shot at, and the round that was shot at me hit a panel on a door, and the panel deflected and didn't hit me. That panel is not designed to be, it's not a bulletproof panel. Just so happened to be the thing that deflected the round. But to your point, it's really hard to figure out the mind of the round. Why did it go this way? And what potential systems could have affected by the path that it traveled? That's interesting, to try and figure that out and ultimately how it impacted the system as a whole. One of the things that you talk about the medevac mission, aircraft coming back and it's full of, I don't know how to say it nicely, blood and other organic matter. And the HIMS industry is no stranger to that, but not all HIMS aircraft are going to scenes involving trauma or gunfire, whereas that was the primary mission that you guys were a part of. But how did you guys deal with that? Such a corrosive environment. Not only is it corrosive, but it's a biohazard, right?
It is.
How did you deal with that?
So the Army has a different approach on it, and it depends, right? Garrison and combat obviously are two different worlds. it's sitting back in the rear of garrison. So we used to do, if we had one, you're absolutely right. So we don't have the EMS interiors like the civilian world. I didn't know until I actually got into the civilian EMS world that, blood floors and blood dams were a thing that were actually engineered into the cabins. And I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. Like they protect the airframe from all that. Like on the Blackhawk, and we've had it in garrison multiple times, where it was traumatic injuries, we would down the aircraft for corrosion control inspection. And then just, we'd pull the floors up. We'd tear the whole thing apart just to wash it, clean it, and make sure everything, because of the corrosive introduction. Combat, they don't have that luxury every time. So we would do it. They do a lot of basically real quick cleanups, and just turn the aircraft as fast as you can. But, the great thing about understanding, one of the ways that our military operates and we have the capabilities to do this is as the aircraft rotate in and out of theater of operations, they get reset. So they come back home, they get ripped all apart, cleaned, assessed, repaired, put back together, and then added back to the fleet. So while you're out there, that aircraft only has to fly its entire duration while it's deployed, and then it's going to get really all the attention it needs once it goes back home. And so that's part of the cycle that they develop. There's a lot of things we'll assess and we'll look at and we'll go, all right, can this make it till reset? Yes. Okay, cool. And then engineers get involved with different stuff, depending on what they want to make decisions on, do it if the aircraft could live with it, if it's not detrimental and they don't want to take the aircraft out of service because it is in combat environment, But we've also pulled the trigger and sent them home, and they go back to the depot where it's just, they can't be fixed out there. And it's load them on a plane and fly them home. That's it. They're done, so did their job and they'll get rebuilt and someday make it back out. I had actually just reminded me, I had an aircraft one time that we pulled in the phase and we pulled the front top hydraulic deck cover off. And this was like a 93 Lima. It was a beautiful aircraft. Like it was brand new. And I immediately looked at my inspector. I was a supervisor. I looked at my inspector and I said, hey, go through historical records. I want to see if this thing went to depot. And so went back in the records, and sure enough, so it was end of 2003. There was an entry in the logbook, and it said, aircraft run over by Bradley, transition section, tail, and main rotor destroyed. And it was like, what? And they rebuilt it, So here it was, like 6 years later, it was back out in the desert. So it's like,
that's something you would expect,
awesome. Right? Ran over by Bradley, and then one of my guys, he was like, I remember that aircraft, because everybody works. He was in Kuwait working on the port, and he said it was sitting on a pallet waiting to go back to Texas. And, they had all this, everybody staring at it like, what happened to that thing? Because the whole midsection is just gone.
Wow. And
it was like, wow. So that was an interesting one. It just never knew what you're going to get every day.
Yeah.
Well, James, I am an Air Force brat, so I have a soft part in my heart for anyone that's been in the service. So thank you so much for your service.
Oh.
I know in your time in the Army that you earned a couple of awards and medals. Can you tell us a little bit more about those awards and the circumstances leading to being awarded?
Yeah, so there were numerous. I mean, it's nothing. I say it, but it's it's not like a Silver Star or Medal of Honor or anything like that. No, I received an Army commendation multiple times from different mission sets. So 2002, I was deployed to Saudi Arabia. We supported the Air Force with medevac support, and we had a bunch of different things that went down. What we ended up doing was we had both aircraft went out of service for transmissions, and we ended up doing 2 transmission replacements out there, and minimal equipment, minimal support and everything, and we did a phenomenal job. And that was one of the things that at the time it was the Central Command commander, which was Tommy Franks at the time. We were on their radar. I mean, this was all the way up to the Pentagon and almost White House level because it was so detrimental for the mission. But it was, so that was one time. Other than that, just service awards for different things, just basically, flying the missions, doing stuff. I had bigger than that. I trying to think, I received a Sikorsky Rescue Award the first time, and it was like that was actually probably one of the most highest. And I've received Sikorsky Maintenance Award as well. So
outline that incident and what happened with that for us.
Thank you to our sponsor, Rotorcraft Repair and Manufacturing, manufacturer of DSX, Dragon Skin Extreme, an FFA-approved rotor blade leading-edge erosion corrosion protective coating with a proven record of durability in harsh environments like sand and rain. Contact Seth at rotorcraft.biz and stop wasting money on other so-called erosion coatings.
Oh, the rescue award?
Yep.
So actually, it was at Fort Campbell, Blackhawk crashed during training exercise. And so we actually launched within 20 minutes. We had 5 aircraft responding to the scene. And I was one of those crews that were part of that. And so we had, point of injury pickup to go back to the hospital there on Fort Campbell. And then we had follow-on missions where we actually flew people to Dashville. So it was a side of you're doing this job, and at the same time it was a Blackhawk that crashed. So you're loading people into a Blackhawk, and you're looking at a Blackhawk and the remains of it. And it was kind of like, to me, it was, as tragic for the families and everybody. So, there were fatalities involved with that, but for me being so young when that happened, it was a real big eye opener for me that these things, I remember my immediate takeaway was like helicopters and trees don't get along, and trees win. Like it was you kind of like, aluminum's pretty stout until you realize that wood is actually stronger, and it's just like, wow, because when you're looking at the wreckage and you're just like, I realized, I always heard FAA inspectors and different people, hey, you don't ever want to see that. You don't ever want to be part of that, and I carried that with me a lot because of the fact that it's when you see it, and I hope, afraid no mechanic ever has to deal with any of that stuff. And I remember talking just yesterday with somebody about that because we're still trying, there's a lot of conversations that I have where we look at the thoughts and the mentalities of mechanics and maintainers and different aspects and stuff. And actually, putting together these classes and doing all the different research and trying to figure out how do you convey those messages to the technician so that they understand clearly, without having to experience that. So, somebody was telling me that when we were talking, he said, dude, I've been involved, in 2 investigations, and as a mechanic having to testify and actually, state for the record of everything that he goes, I don't ever want anybody to have to do that. And he goes, nobody should have to do that, and it's amazing because, doing the research, when we talk about that, the risk, simple maintenance tasks and what the outcome can end up as. And that's what, kind of started the conversation on that. But that was what the rescue award, with all 5 crews, we all received rescue awards for the people that we got out of there. So
interesting that happened so early in your career, because like you said, there's folks that go their entire career and never respond to a mishap in the way that you did early in your career, and the way that has shaped your response to maintenance as a whole has been interesting and a benefit to our community as a whole. Something you brought up that I think is important is, nobody should ever have to go through these experiences, but unfortunately we know that we will. So being able to learn not have to relearn the lessons that you already taught, I think is one of the things that we're always looking for. I know in my time in my unit, I was in charge of the safety program. So I worked with our maintenance folks and like, hey, what's our mishap response plan look like? What tools do we think we might need to respond to a mishap? And we talked about it and whiteboarded it and did all the things that we thought we'd have to potentially use and need to respond to an aircraft mishap. But from your experience, what do you think, when you revisit that, were there tools you needed and didn't have, or vice versa? Or what do you think was important in that response from a maintenance standpoint?
So there was the biggest takeaway that we had. So this is one of the things you always have the internal kind of after action review, and you're just like, and we did that, right? We sat down and we go, okay, let's look at this whole entire thing. And what we realized, out of anything, was we really got lucky. because of the fact that there was a field training exercise going on, and we had 3 crews out in the field at the time, right there with that training unit. And then we had the 2 aircraft that were on duty at the hangar. And that's what made that 5 within 20 minutes. So here you had the division and everybody celebrating. You know, they're just like, wow, you guys are awesome. You do a great job. And we're like, it would have only been 2. That's what we were saying. It's totally like and second up, the second aircraft, you got a half-hour response to get back to the hangar once you're called in. So that would have been a delayed effort. And so what we realized, and from there, we initiated a third up. And we said, we're going to have a third standby aircraft because of you don't want to have to deal with mass casualty evacuation, but it's a factor that always hangs out there. And so how do you mitigate it the best that you can? And that's what we deemed was we'll just have a third aircraft on standby. And then that way, I think the determination was to just have the crew on, normal work duty schedule for a week at a time while they're on call. And that way it wasn't, 24 hours at the hangar or pushing duty day or extremes or anything like that. But we knew internally that it was like, man, we got lucky. We got so lucky. Every time it just so happened that, the stars aligned or whatever. But from the maintenance aspect was we had all those aircraft available, which is that again, everybody coming together and doing their job as far as the crew chiefs and taking care of their aircraft and the maintenance platoon and everybody else that supports that effort, that we're able to do that. We like to take pride in our primary mission, which is, dust off in itself to dedicated, unhesitated service to our fighting forces. That's the acronym. That's where that comes from. Can you do a CAS-evac, a casual evacuation from other aircraft that are available? Absolutely. But from the medevac side, that's our mission. That's our purpose in life when we were on duty. So it was like, if you can't do it, you don't want to hand it over to nobody else. So,
thanks for joining us for part 1 of this conversation. Make sure you don't miss part 2.
Stand by for a message after a word from our sponsors.
Thank you to our sponsor, Precision Aviation Group. Mission critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed-wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory globally, 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
Thanks to our sponsor, Airbus. Airbus provides the most efficient helicopter solutions to its customers who serve, protect, save lives, and safely carry passengers in demanding environments. Its civil and military helicopters are flying all over the world, making missions possible. Visit airbus.com for more information.
Thank you to our sponsor, Rotorcraft Repair and Manufacturing, manufacturer of DSX, Dragon Skin Extreme, an FFA-approved rotor blade leading-edge erosion corrosion protective coating with a proven record of durability in harsh environments like sand and rain. Contact Seth at rotorcraft.biz and stop wasting money on other so-called erosion coatings.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Vertical MRO Podcast. We hope you found James Simmons' insights on his career journey, industry challenges, and efforts to develop the next generation of aviation professionals as inspiring as we did. His dedication to advancing rotorcraft maintenance and fostering new talent underscores the vital role leadership and training play in shaping the future of our industry. Don't miss the upcoming Vertical MRO Conference, where industry leaders like James are shaping the future of rotorcraft maintenance. Stay tuned for more conversations with industry experts, and thanks for listening.